floor. How do I keep that floor from rotting out? And do I put linoleum down? That would be one possibility. But I think even more important is to make sure that the mix, do use a litter over that earth floor, and I've done that. The first picture you saw, that was one of my chicken houses too, and it has a wood floor. And in that case, your litter, keep your litter in there too, but just make really sure that it stays very dry. And the more damp, the more you're going to get that decaying effect in the wood.
But should I put a liner before I start?
That's up to you. I didn't in that building. I just put down some thick plywood and made sure that it never got damp. I always added enough fresh material so that the litter stayed dry. Now, folks, I want to ask you your opinion on this question. Who is smarter, a chicken or your average chicken scientist?
Chicken.
And chicken is smarter by a long shot. And a good example is, what do you do? What do you do about the external parasites, lice or mites? And again, you read almost any source on the subject, buy an approved medicated powder and blah, blah, blah. For medicated, read toxic. But the idea is, and this is so true of our approach, isn't it? Even with our own health, we think in terms of treating illness, treating health problems rather than prevention. Chickens are smarter than that. And they're focused more on prevention. So with regard to external parasites, if you give them a chance to dust bathe, they will take care of the problem themselves. And you won't have to be looking for an approved medicated powder to treat the symptoms after the birth. So they will find a place to dust bathe in outdoors if it's dry enough. But as a backup in the hen house, I always have this dust box with some dusty materials in it so they can dust bathe, and they just don't get lice or mites.
What is that
They have
material?
access to, constant access to dust bathe. Now,
Excuse me, what is that dusty material?
Anything that is very fine and dusty and non-toxic. Would that be true of clay soil, dried and sifted through a sieve? Sure. Sphagnum peat moss is pretty dry and fluffy. So there are a number of different options like that. Dusty and non-toxic, wear a dust mask when you're working with them, when you're building boxes. Now, what do you think of when you see this picture? Obviously, that's a feed mill. So, it's kind of difficult to address this issue of feeding, because the fact is, for most of us, this is where feed is going to come from. I'm not being naive on that score. But I think that we need to remember how the Adam and Eve of chickens, the red jungle fowl, out of which domesticated chickens developed, how did they eat? That is the guide to what we should be feeding our chickens as much as we can, not what's on the label. But, as a matter of fact, most of us are going to be feeding feeds that start here. Next slide, please. And it's not an easy decision to make, but I want you to approach highly processed feeds for chickens, your chickens, the same way you approach highly processed feeds for you. And let's face it, some people in this room don't have a problem with eating a lot of highly processed foods, and others have gotten real skeptical of that idea. So that may be your guide to how you want to feed your chicken. If you think processed feeds are okay for you, foods are okay for you, You may be more comfortable than I am with highly processed feed for chicken. If you've gotten real skeptical of that processed food, when you're looking for more natural food, then I probably want to go with chickens as well. Feed, commercial feed comes in 3 formulations. The medicated, Jim was talking about medicated feeds for chicks, the starter feed, and you may not be able to find a non-medicated chick feed, starter feed. You might want to go directly to the stage 2 feed and supplement with supplement for protein in some way. That's what I always did when I was buying commercial feeds. I would start with a stage 2 grower developer feed, pullet developer or grower ration, and would substitute with fish meal or beef liver to boost the protein. I never, ever did a medicated feed. And then the third formulation is layer feed. And I want you to remember, don't feed young growing birds, chicks in the brooder or growing birds. Don't feed them the layer feed. Their development can have problems with the higher mineral content and the lower protein of the layer feed, especially the development of the reproductive organs. So don't make that mistake of just figuring you can feed the chicks what you've been feeding the adult layers.
At what age can you switch to layer feed?
When do you switch to layer feed? A couple of weeks before you expect onset of lay.
Okay.
And in the breeds that Jim has been talking about this morning, onset of lay will be approximately 22 weeks. So what I want you to keep in mind, what I want you to remember as a metaphor is feeding is the feeding spectrum. Feeding is like a spectrum. And on one end is a totally confined flock who is totally dependent on what we're feeding with a scoop from our back. That's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is my grandmother's flock, totally free ranging on a 100-acre farm and feeding themselves what Miss Natural Chicken would most want to eat. Okay? So that's the 2 ends of the spectrum. Where are you going to come down on the spectrum? Somewhere in the middle probably. That's where I'm at. I'm not all the way where my grandmother was with my feeding. And I hope none of you will rely totally on the scoop of feed from the turtle. But because we can all move more toward the other end of the spectrum. We can all provide more natural feeds in some ways, and we'll talk about some of the strategies we can use that have a feeding component or feeding time. But it starts in the brood. And you should start offering natural feeds to the chicks from day 1. Grass clumps or garden thinnings pulled up by the roots and offered as green feeds, crushed hard-boiled egg, soldier grubs or earthworms. And I want you to notice something. You see just the corner of the feeder here. That is very high-quality feed. It's it is made by yours truly at great effort and expense. It is fresh. And it is based on certified organic ingredients. It is much better feed than the feed that you would likely buy at your local co-op. And what are they doing? They're ignoring it until they have had a run at the good stuff. I want you to remember that picture and take your hint from your chicken. If you put some of that dry, dusty meal in the feeder and at the same time throw out a handful of sunflower seeds and crickets and earthworms. If those chickens even look at that feeder before they've eaten every last one of those morsels, I will eat the remainder of the feeder. So pay attention to your chickens and what they're hungry for. I was at a flock of chickens yesterday that was in one of those bad runs. Somebody pulled a fistful of fresh grass and threw it in there, and it was a feeding frenzy. Taking hints from your chickens about what's good food. Yes, ma'am.
Will chickens eat crayfish or fish scraps?
Chickens, the question is, would chickens eat fish scraps? And
Or
the answer is,
crayfish.
You bet. Okay, next.
So you said, so the grass stuff, you said pull it up by the roots, is there a reason why you mentioned?
Yeah, I said pull those grass clumps up by the roots. Why? Well, they'll actually take some of that soil too and get some of that mineral content of the soil. And incidentally, feeding those natural feeds in the brooder gets those chickens used to natural foods. And so when they do get mature enough to put them out on pasture, which is the next slide, they will be more used to foraging natural foods on their own. So this is of major importance. Find some way to pasture your birds, if at all possible. Because pasture is going to give them access to their 3 food groups. Green plants, we don't think the chickens are grazers, and they're not. The same way with cows, but an important portion of their diet, if they can get it, is green plants, rich in vitamins and enzymes. Secondly, seeds, or if they can get to them, fruits like berries. And thirdly, animal foods like worms and insects. So on a pasture, they're getting all 3 of those very important food groups. That's one group. And if you don't have a pasture, you may well have a lawn, right? I knew another guy down at the Pasture Poultry Producers Association who, when she was making her start on, I forget if it was a quarter or half acre suburban lawn, a lot, she served a local broiler market with 300 to 400 broilers per season raised on her lawn in lieu of pasture. So this is some waterfowl in my place, some muscovies and geese on one of my lawns in an electric net fence, water available, nest box available, and I move them around. I rotate them over all the parts of my pasture. And you could, there are many, many people with small flocks like Pat writes about in her books, City Chicks. That's all the lawn, all the pasture they have is their lawns, but they utilize it in various creative ways. Now, if you can't even put them out on the lawn, at least avoid that static chicken run dotted with chicken food, like we were talking about earlier. And the solution to that is, if you have to go with a static run, then bring the deep litter concept outside and lay down that heavy layer of any organic debris, spent crop plants, grass clippings, leaves, and cover as deeply as you can. Cover that static run with that for best manure management and recapturing the fertility in the poops and breaking parasite and disease cycles. Again, it's just a win-win situation.
I read your book. I had a deep rooter on. I have a chicken tractor with a 40 square foot boom